Hello, welcome. My name is Avon, CRM and Marketing Automation Specialist, and today I'm talking with here who had a question around using projects and then billing for time. I think one of the things that people often do is they look for an easy project management tool, or they look for something where they can easily track and share and ideally low cost, particularly when the business is trying to grow. They're looking for just satisfying some needs. But I'd like to challenge people to think a little bit more about the implications, about the reporting, being able to find out things like profitability, how much it costs you to deliver a service, and then also what's the profit margin that you're actually making on that. It's not as easy as it sounds because there's time track, different cost rates for different people. You've got due dates and durations of projects, etc. Awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the questions you had and the problems you're facing?
Yeah, thanks, Avon. So straight up, I'll just show people what I have. So right now, Avon, this is currently what I got, and it's a very, very messy project management system, but essentially I run a video production agency. All these tickets here, they're either a video, milestone tasks, or projects. So everything's in here. The reason why I've been using Notion at the moment is that currently I'm working very much in the business on little micro tasks. So I have to be a project manager as well as the director of a video, as well as the account manager. So there's a lot of little details I need to be able to quickly communicate with the people. And so this is why I've picked something like this over Zoho projects, because with Zoho projects, it was very hard to keep up to date with granular levels of detail, which is why I've done that. But what's ended up happening now, and this is where I've started getting into these growth problems you mentioned I would get into, is that I'm at a point where my company's almost ready to scale, but one of the only things holding us back is knowing how profitable a project actually is. And that comes in the form of measuring the amount of time we spend on service. Essentially, what I have for my vision is that I want to be able to somehow I know how I could group these by project in Notion, so that's not what I'm thinking about. What I'm trying to think about is how do I measure the amount of money spent on a single project? And a project's a monthly retainer invoice. And in that monthly retainer invoice, I might have 8 different videos and a couple other managed services provided with it. So my vision, this is what I'm thinking, and you'll probably challenge me on this a lot, which will be good, but my vision is the ability to just be able to track the time spent with a client by simply being able to open up a project or a task and click a button, and it measures that person's time with their individual price to that client, and it also associates it with what task they're doing, just so that it's more so for my own management, so that I can look back after a month and go, did we make profit? Is there anything that's eating up a lot of money, so that I can make smart business decisions to make my company more efficient? That's currently where my head's at. Is that clear, or is there anything else you'd like me to share?
It is clear. One of the things I want to do is just pause on this and have a look at it. So I think what I want to do is not necessarily give you a specific answer. I want to talk through some concepts that you should be looking for, because I might not recommend the right thing for you just on this, but if we talk through some of the concepts, you'll understand what's the ideal thing to be looking for. So first of all, I can see you've got some naming conventions there, which I think is excellent. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times people just throw data in without naming it properly, and it ends up going missing, or they can't find it, or they don't know what version or whatever it is. And I understand that with video editing, that version control is very, very important. The other things that I can notice there is you've got some categories, groups, and statuses. Now, you can get those things anywhere. And, you mentioned, or you said the word ticket, but this is just a line item on a database. And then you've got it's live editable. So you could do that technically in something like SharePoint, or you could do it in Airtable, or you could do it in Notion as you're doing. It's probably less about those components, that's pretty much easy to find no matter where you go. The thing that you're asking about is that budget tracking, that cost analysis, but then I also want to ask you, how detailed do you want to go with that? Do you want to be tracking? Do you want it to connect to your emails and then pick up and then automatically add 6 minutes whenever you email a client, or whenever you set a calendar entry, do you want that automatically going in as well? These are the sorts of granularity things that, depending on how you want to bill or what the relationship is, obviously a lawyer is going to track every 5 seconds. But then also, once you're capturing that, particularly if you're capturing it automatically, you then need to be able to make sure that, one, it's categorized correctly. Two, if you've got a recurring meeting with someone that's just like a networking catch up as well, that's not also adding billable time. Then you have to go through the 1,000 entries that are automatically happening to make sure they're all legitimate and categorized correctly. So there's a balance. And then one other point I want to make is on like the time tracking side is a lot of people don't know what they're talking about or how to conceptualize tracking time. They might go, yeah, this took me an hour, but there's other people out there that would go, I only track the time if I had to press the enter button and that was my billable thing. It would be start timer, enter, stop timer. So they wouldn't go, all right, well, I've got to sit down and do a job here, start the timer. All right, I'm going to get to the page where I need to be. I'm going to read through the task and then I'm going to press the enter button and then I'll stop the timer. That makes more sense because that's that thought, that time that it would have taken an employee to do a task, including understanding it, doing it, and then reporting on it, and then shutting off the timer.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I want to include it from, you're right. I'd like, you know, when you quote something, you want the quotes on the outside. I want the timer to start on the outside of a task being done. So from the moment they think they got to do this task, they hit start, all the way to doing the task, cleaning it up, not stopping then until it's like done, and then hitting stop timer. That's ideally what I'd like to. I think that's what I want.
Yes.
Because, and that really then helps serve the purpose of just seeing where my costs are. It's really all it is it's where it's seeing where my costs are. Staff is becoming my biggest cost now. It's no longer stuff and subscriptions. It is staff and myself. So I need to understand that.
And when you say granular, like is the average task half an hour, or like do you have minimum as a 15-minute block or something? Or like if there's a lot of, like I know there's a lot of people that have multiple tasks running at the same time, and so they go, all right, well, I'm tracking 4 timers at the same time. Well, you're not really, that's not effective. You're just task switching. It should be maybe like scheduling your tasks as well to go what time of day when you're doing each, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it is definitely. So one of the principles is work on one task at a single time. So, you know, someone who's editing isn't answering phone calls or emails. They like just keep that, like that stuff gets shut off. It's more about workflow. Things are done in 15-minute intervals, but the average task probably goes for about 60 to 75 minutes, I would say. 15 minutes, just easy maths. I'm not worried about being billed or tracked on a interval number. Just the idea that they can hit start and stop. That's what I'm thinking. You tell me if I'm thinking wrong. But like that, I can just, so that way at the end of the month, after I send my retainer invoice, or like after I've billed someone for a month of retainer service, they do the retainer service for a month, and at the end of that month, I can see if I've made a profit and how much profit I've made.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And the reason why I'm sort of just digging into the questions and the problem is just to think a little bit more about your situation and the nuanced components of it. So one other thing I want to talk about is on the retainer itself. Do you bill up front or after the fact?
Up front. This is messy. Like, so for my small retainers, I will bill with subscriptions so that it is automatically taken out of the money. Anything that gets into that large retainer service, so I have extra large clients, we will do a monthly, which sometimes means we get our money 2 weeks late, but it's just to save us that 3% fees, because when some of these services get so big, it gets to the point where it made sense for us to take that extra 3% profit. So, you know, just being stingy like that.
That's all right. The other question is, what do you do with overages or underages? So like if you didn't use all the credit, what happens? And then also if you went over for that month, what happens?
Right, so it doesn't matter in a sense if we go over or under for the, like, in terms of the time we spend with the client. It's not about time spent with the client, it's about deliverables. So in any of our retainer services, we have a set exact number of videos to give them per month.
Yeah.
So we may make a whole lot more money, we may make a whole lot less money month to month depending, but it's in our control whether we do that or not. So the main thing would be though tracking, like if we're going well under with a client continuously, I may look at if we're giving them a fair service, and if not, maybe we give them a bit more. But at the same time, it's like just being able to identify bad relationships and make sure that we can end them or ask for more money.
Yeah, I think everything's gone to a subscription, so people are used to that, and services are no different. And I think a lot of the time, particularly if you're talking about deliverables, well, that's great because your intellectual property and your ability to deliver faster means you increase profitability. But the value you bring is the outputs to the customer at the quality and the standard that they expect. So you shouldn't be punished for doing a good job and doing it faster. That's just, you know, your benefit for being clever. So
Yeah.
The reason why I asked that is say, for example, if you had maybe you had different people at different rates, and I'm coming at it from the IT industry, and that, for consulting services, we might say it's a technician, a developer, and a consultant, and they use the budget at different speeds. But that's if it's a dollar budget. Other things might be, maybe it's an hour budget. A dollar budget makes more sense because there's quite a difference between a tech and a consultant with many years of business experience, a degree or two, etc. So it makes sense to track different things in a different way.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I'll butt in there as well then. So that's good. So if I was, just as a theoretical question then, my company might also get into the consulting service. It's essentially just the more affordable version. Not everyone can afford our production team, but they can afford our thinking. So basically where we think for them a little bit a month sort of deal. How would you handle underages and overages with that when you do bill, when you track how many hours they use?
So we've got a system, and it allows unused credit because it's on a dollar basis rather than a deliverable or hours basis. So that would be like the agreement type that you have with the person. So you could have multiple types. One could be an hours, one could be a dollars, one could be I'll say the word incidences, but that's more IT related. Incident could be like an instance or an occasion or a thing that happens. So say, for example, you might say if you've got a budget of 10 video productions a month, and then one video production uses an incident or an instant. So as soon as they get to the 10, then they're over budget. And then the other question is, what do you want to do when they're over budget? Do you borrow from the next period, or do you start at invoicing over and above your retainer? So say, for example, we've got a retainer. We allow unused balance to be carried forward 60 days. Because the other thing is if you're not using the balance, or maybe you are, but you're not counting it properly, you want it to somewhat expire, because then you've got this credit that has built up, and it's kind of a liability on your books, really. If someone goes, I've got all this unused credit, I want a refund, you really run quite a risk. So you need to make sure you're acquitting it properly, writing it off, or doing whatever you're doing to make sure that those books kind of level out. If you happen to go over, then you either want to borrow from the next period, but probably too much, because then you're providing services in advance instead of being paid in advance. But you still want to maintain the relationship. The next step is, if you do go well over that, then you want to provide separate invoices to say, look, you've asked for 10 hours, we've given you 60. It's well and above the she'll be right, mate kind of principle. So you need to you need to pay for it. But at least you want to get those notifications and those flags when they're coming close to the budget, so that you can say, have the conversation, look, we're getting really close to the budget, we're going to go over. If we do this, do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it next month? Or do you just want to pay a little extra and we'll just get it sorted straight away? Yeah,
that ultimately is actually the ultimate solution I think I'm looking for. It doesn't mean doing the overages and underages, but it is the ability to see where the money is at, and just have those healthy conversations with my customers and professional relationships before they become a problem like that.
We need to separate the conversation. And one is like a retainer agreement, and the other one is a project. So a project has, by definition, has a defined end. And one of the things, we were talking about is you wanted to get a little bit clear around the terminology of each of the, because when you got to go shop for a bit of software, they're using all the terminology because it's industry standard. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know what to ask, what questions to ask. Ideally, a project has a defined start and end date. An agreement or retainer is a perpetual ongoing, or it could be a contract. Yes, it could have a defined end date of like 12 months. Or you would say after 12 months you review the pricing, or after 12 months you maybe have a scheduled price increase to keep up with CPI, or maybe it's just the contract is month to month, but it's rolling. Those are the sorts of things where you would say it is in perpetuity, but ultimately it will end. You're not going to live for 20 million years.
That's a good thing, mate. So you tell me, because I don't know if I'm mixing up retainer, because I do offer a service. It's billed monthly. It's on a monthly agreement with a 3-month minimum. But it doesn't define what they get is like hours we give them, or that it's that we give them a set number of deliverables a month, aiming for a specific result per month. The result isn't actually dependent on the, what do you call it?
Hours.
The invoicing and or the billing and anything like that. So maybe we just separate that, but we have a way of...
It's still a retainer, but it's task-based. So that's what I'm saying. It's like that incident or that task or that instance, that thing that you're doing. You mentioned the word ticket, and I'll use the IT terminology because that's the thing I'm going to show you. But you could have each task, we'll use that word interchangeably with ticket, because a task, when you look at it on a project management thing, usually has a text area to say, what are we actually doing on the task? Has a due date, has perhaps a schedule date of when you actually got to do it, or how long it takes, maybe like a time budget. It'll probably have some subtasks. It'll probably have you could probably assign it to one or many people, and then you can probably create a little bit of a discussion feed on it to go backwards and forwards. So I want to use, again, the framework concept. Let's not get wrapped around, this is a ticket and that's a task and that's a something. Other than a ticket and task, use interchangeably. Project, but then a project has tasks, right? So project, task, ticket. So a project is like the wrapper that goes around it, and it's like we're going to build a house, and when the house is done, that's it. But a task, like say for example on a project for building a house, you could still have a recurring task that's unanimous across the whole thing, like a weekly check-in. That task happens every week. It doesn't matter what stage their house is built. House build is in.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can I just try and draw that back and clarify that with you?
Sure.
Because I'll explain what terminology I've done, and then you can help me see what terminology I should be saying.
Yeah.
Because this might just help a bit. So I'm just going to open up. It'll be 2 seconds. This is just to help me try and clarify what terminology I should be using.
Yeah.
I'm just going to run through the whole sales journey, and then you can tell me how this works. So there's Mediable, and there's a customer, and we agree on a service. So we actually get a sale. And then the way the sale's broken up is it's on a monthly retainer.
Yep.
So like this right here. Now, the way I've defined this in my system is that I actually define that into a project in Notion. So this becomes a project. And maybe I can just get rid of that and call it a monthly retainer. But then inside that, deliverables. So I'll have like, which might be like 4 videos.
Yep.
And then inside that might include 1 filming session. So 1 filming, a set amount of editing, and obviously then a set amount of like social media management. And so the way I break the naming conventions up for these, I call these all items, because that's how Notion describes all these, like these specific details here.
Yep.
They call them items, like in my database, but I call that a project. I literally just call this a video, and then I call this a task. What would you suggest I actually like call the greens or everything?
Your retainer is the sort of the framework of inside that is a recurring project, because the project is the video. Like there's only going to be 1 video that you're going to do. Then you've got some recurring tasks in there, but then you're saying you've also got an hours budget for things like social media. So what I'm hearing is it's kind of flexible on what actually happens in there. What I would imagine is that project almost just then becomes a task or an incident or something like that. So because you can't have multiple layers on how you track things necessarily in a retainer. So it's either going to be hours, or it's going to be dollars, or it's going to be set number of occurrences.
If I had to give you the specific deliverables, for instance, here it would simply just be 4 videos uploaded.
Yeah.
And we do and then there's a few little like services that happen a few days after that. Like I don't know how to describe that, but essentially it's 4 videos uploaded and managed a month. And so the way that works is, so I'll explain my thinking behind this, and then maybe you can help clean it up to industry standard. That's what I'm thinking might be helpful. So right now, what I'm doing is like I bill on a monthly retainer, which is this section right here. And then so in Notion, I contain it to a project. So I call it a project. Maybe it's called something else, but I basically create a project number, and this specific project number will then be associated to every single video that gets produced, from planning, editing, shooting, filming, right? The idea is any time counted on these videos can then be associated back to the project, and basically by the end of it I'll have a cost associated with the project, and I can minus that off the monthly retainer's budget sort of thing, and that leaves me with a gross profit to a degree, in a sense. That's why I can count direct costs on a monthly retainer.
Yeah, so that lies the conversation. So what I was saying is that you can track items, hours, and dollars. Now, what it sounds like you want to do is, for all intents and purposes, internally, you're going to be tracking the dollar amount, and you're going to say, this is the cost, because there's a difference between the sell price of a resource and the cost of a resource. So you're going to have, someone who's might be $50 an hour, and you're charging them out at $100 an hour. And the cost side will allow you, because you'll have a desired profit margin for each of these as well. Everything else can be a task within that, even if it's a project like a video. That's a function that has a start and end, because a task has a start and end. Then the filming,
Yes.
and then the social media. So you'd say, we must do this video. It always takes the same amount, including the editing. And then whatever's left in the tank, we'll put towards social media.
It sort of goes like that. Well, essentially what it is all tasks get done to a specific amount. Like I've got a specific amount, and what it is essentially of the entire monthly retainer budget, there is usually, so cost of goods sold, so my COGS, roughly speaking, is about this much, which is 20%. That's what I'm aiming for. So this is all theoretical. And then roughly speaking, I have this bit here. This is other things. So there's COGS, then there is labor costs. Yep, so we've got labor costs, and there's labor. Well, this is actually not quite right. Labor kind of fits in here as well. It's a bit messy, actually. Now I think about this, I haven't thought of this properly.
If you go to high level numbers, so time and materials. So time is X, materials is Y, and then the remainder is profit.
Yeah.
I reckon start backwards and go from your desired profit margin, because like if you go, I make 20% profit, but then your profit could, if it's $8, well, it's not worth your time. So if you think of your selling costs to get to that point, say for example, if you're going to spend $500 to acquire a customer, then you probably want to have at least 10 times that for the year worth of profit. So then that's probably $5,000 profit. Then divide that by each month, so that it would be 400 and something, and then for 20 for whatever you sell, for 400 and something to be the 20% of, then working really badly on maths, it might be a $2,000 a month product, $400 profit margin. So
everything's on a minimum's 20% profit. That's 100% true.
Yeah.
Everything's on a minimum 20% profit. So cost of goods sold, so there is a direct cost, which is 20% again. Yeah. And this usually includes things like ad spend, buying materials for video, just
cameras.
Like cameras. And then basically this is what usually gets taken out is other costs is here in the yellow. So this is usually staff, materials, advertising. This is COGS. This is right. COGS. And then this is, what do you call them? Operating expenses. Because in a sense, here's the other thing as well to think is that the people I hire are operating expenses. I am, what is it called? So, because I'm hiring them for the same amount of days, whether they do the job in the time or not. Because so they're all paid like that. So, but I do want to be able to measure directly so I can see if they're falling within the yellow's budget. That's essentially what I'm doing.
So why don't I show you some things on screen that will show you how to capture some of that and then give you some of the reporting. And then you'll get a little bit of a better idea of what I'm talking about.
That'd be perfect.
Okay, so this is a ticketing system. It's very IT generated. And if I hover over some of these, you can see some detail. So every task becomes a ticket. Now we're a little bit reactive and somewhat proactive as well. We do have auto-generated tasks. So say for example, someone's got a retainer, we might have 2 or 3 tickets that are automatically generated every month to do certain things. So one might be send a report. Ideally, you don't want to make it too granular. You would have a few things on one ticket, but you would imagine whatever is a ticket or a task is something that you would assign to one person. You can see there's the age of the ticket. So, sometimes things might be given different priorities, and I can change the fields that are displayed, but you determine whether or not it's been scheduled to someone, who it's been assigned to, when it was assigned, the last update, the budget, the resource that's working on it. So ideally, if you want something to be done, it should be assigned to a person and be given a due date. If I click into one of these, okay, so clicked into a ticket. This is just a test contact, but you can see a couple things. So the first is just the summary, which is kind of like the task title. Obviously, we want to assign it to a person and a contact, and that has relevance for billing purposes. And in terms of, email, like say for example, you want to notify a particular person of updates to tasks, etc. As I scroll down, now we've got different boards, we've got different service lines, and each service line has its own board so that they're treated in the way that's relevant to them. There is a thing here called agreement, which is probably more around retainer. So you can have it so that tickets get created and then are automatically assigned to a particular agreement. Then you might have other things that's why I'm saying with service lines, maybe you've got some on-call support and it's not captured under any of the retainers. So you could have a separate service desk or a separate bucket that all of the tasks or tickets go into so that that's billed separately. In this case, it's coming against, there's no agreements there, but we can create one but say for example, you want to put a start date, end date, duration, an SLA or priority. So if someone's got a service level agreement, maybe you need it done absolutely urgently, and then there's some other tasks that are not. You're sort of prioritizing. I've made type and subtype required because I want to try and track categories of things. So I'm going to put this one as, I should add some more. We'll just call it internal other. We've got, so a status. So a status can control maybe the email that they get saying, maybe internally you want other people to know where the ticket or the task is at. So I think a lot of times people just have open, in progress, and closed. But when you've got a lot on the board, you want to be able to like pick it up and say, yep, it's assigned, so that no one else goes and grabs that ticket. And maybe you've got someone, particularly when you've got a high volume, you'd have someone just like developing out the information on the ticket before it's actually assigned. So you might say triaged. So you can come up with custom status to really indicate the phases in your project. Then you might want to have somewhere where you can have internal notes that are not shared with the customer, because if you're creating stages and statuses, ideally it could be good for communication to be able to show them what's the progress of their project, ticket, task, to prove that you're actually doing things. The other things you want to do is give them information so that they're asking less questions when the invoice comes around. What have you done for me this month? Then we've got other things like, that's the initial description. What triggered it off? You've got internal. So again, it's just another text box. Resolution. So in the case of this ticketing system, when we've solved the problem, a resolution will go in there. You might want to track it up against the sales opportunity. You might want to give it some budget hours. Maybe you got on the phone with the client and they said, yep, I authorized 5 hours. Things like that. Anything that's going to help you, because if you're the person that's in the sales conversation, you need whoever's going to pick up the task later to have enough backstory to be able to understand exactly what it is that they have to do, what the relationship is. Maybe you said, all right, well, this isn't going to be billable. We're going to do this for free. Or maybe if you do it for free, say for example down here, I can go change the billing. So it's just saying bill time, and maybe I want to change that to do not bill. So it's not going to turn up in an invoice, billable, or no charge. So it will turn up on the invoice, and it'll just have a $0 on the end. So it shows them that you've gone and done them a favor, and it's documented. So because people tend to forget the extra mile that you've gone to at the end of the month when the invoice comes around. Other things like maybe you've started the project or the task, and you're doing some like ad hoc invoicing, but you don't want to bill it until the end of the month. This is more for an ad hoc basis, but if it's part of a retainer, maybe you want it to eat away at the budget immediately, or maybe you want to delay when it eats away at the budget. Other things like you were saying you had some expenses. Does the expense eat into the budget? Or do any of the products that you sell eat into the budget? So I'm just going to save this one, and once it's saved, I'll have a few more options.
Are there additional costs? Is there a way to track those additional costs when I create these projects? And how do they eat into the budget?
Yeah, so you would set that on the agreement settings. But here on the agreement recap, up here would be a number. If we had an agreement that said that they've got $2,000 a month, then I'd see what their current budget is. And then I'd have a look at to see how much has been applied in dollar value and cost, because I might have, like I was saying before, it might cost me $50. I've applied, I'm charging them out at $100, and then my margin would be 50%. And I would understand that my margin from a dollar perspective is $50. So I've got quite a lot of it there. And then on the financial recap, it kind of goes into a little bit more detail on to, it's broken down by services, products, expenses, etc. And then you can see, say for example, the resources that are involved, because different resources cost you different money. You need to be able to understand the impact financially of who you assign. For example, it's probably cheaper for you to assign a resource than to do it yourself, because your charge out rate should be higher as the business owner. Looking through, say for example, with the note, anytime I communicate with a client, there's a cost to that as well. So we might want to capture that. I do have the ability to just stop a timer. I do have the ability to add an expense or a product. So say for example, you took a taxi to the filming site or something like that. Then you can add the receipt, add the note, add the attachment, save it, and then make sure that it's billable with a dollar amount.
Yeah.
Maybe on the communication side, you want to track that so that when those communication items turn up on the invoice. So in this one, it'll pick up the company, the date, and the resource. I might say, all right, well, I'm doing a level 1 job, so I'll bill it as a level 1. It gives me that flexibility. Maybe I want to say maybe the department, you might change it to, maybe it's an administrative cost, but it's not actually a billable. Or say for example, as we're typing stuff up, maybe you've got some standard things that you do on a regular basis. So you might want to chuck in this is a billable service request. If you proceed, just letting you know that this is going to be billable. So you get their agreement before doing anything.
Right, makes
Yeah.
sense. Quick question on that.
Yeah.
So if we do this thing where you're able to click a thing, like just letting you know this is a additional billable thing we can do, that's how it would apply to me.
Yep.
And then I guess you'll be able to apply that to the next monthly retainer. So that might make things confusing. So I'd probably make a separate invoice for it. I think that
Well,
would be
it would be
smarter.
a separate invoice because you deselect the agreement. You'd say it's not covered by the agreement.
Ah, yes, got it.
And
Yeah,
that would
makes
be
sense.
billed out separately anyway. So then
Yeah.
if I come over to here, you can see I've got different work types. So say, for example, I'm just going to send them an email. I'm not going to charge for that. And then this automatically change to do not bill. But maybe they wanted some on-site after hours, which actually has a multiplier on the rate because it costs more to get after hours. So you might say our hours are 9 to 5. If we come out on site, then it's 1.25 times whatever the charge out rate is. And then, for example, maybe you want to say it was billable, not billable, etc. And then when you add your notes, all of that can go in an email. Or maybe you only want it internal only. Or maybe you want some internal and external notes, so you can do the same at the same time. And then who are you going to CC in on it? These are some of the communication levels that you can apply here.
You're taking all this information. You're giving me a lot of things to think about. I should probably use your data comparison matrix. So every time you trigger something, I'm like, yeah, that's necessary, or that would be nice to have.
Yeah.
I can trigger it out onto the comparison matrix and then list the key things that could potentially apply for that.
Yes. One of the other things I would look at here is like scheduling. We talked about maybe if I go check availability, this is actually going to pull in my live calendar, and then it's going to allow me to see what my workload is and then be able to assign it. Obviously it's a weekend today, but I might look at, say, Monday, and then I can see, there's a gap there. I'm going to assign it there.
Yes.
And then,
That's really cool to do. Do you think that would be integratable with Google Calendar?
yes, it is.
If you've got the right integrate with Calendar, because being a marketing agency, I have to use the Google Business Suite.
Yeah. What we're talking about in this instance is a professional services automation tool. There are a range of platforms out there. A lot of them have slightly different features and functions, but ideally, when you're doing services, you do need to track all of those things. And I think the key is budget control, like you said, communication with the customer, and that connection to invoicing, which I think a lot of times people really go, all right, I'm going to use this nice, simple project tool, but then they forget the complexity of billing. And then if they do it on a separate platform, how much money they just lose because they're not being able to track the resource time against their availability, being able to share work around so they're not overloading anyone's a level of elegance when you get to that level, when you can really scale it up. Particularly, you might have a workforce of 100. How do you know all of them are pulling their weight? How do you know all of them are cost effective for your organization?
Yeah, exactly. I think, no, you're 100% right there. And just to give a little note as well, I found Notion was extremely useful in, I guess, what you could call prototyping the informations I need to communicate between staff, because what it does is it allows you to test different ways of sharing data between people, but it doesn't offer any automation services apart from creating templates of data links, but that's not very effective and it can get messy. This is actually what triggered it for me. Is it was a fantastic tool for tracking and managing videos we needed to create for clients. That's it. It didn't, anytime there was a task outside of that, we'd not include it in there. So that even meant things like getting my editor to make a Photoshop thumbnail for a video.
You pretty much nailed it in that you don't know how you're going to work with your clients until you're working with your clients. So prototyping out on a low grade platform is fine, and then when you want to achieve a level of scale, you've got to refine it down into a more structured process. So that's pretty much the evolution of selecting software.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just my personal recommendation. If you've got to test a database, Notion's a great prototyping tool because you can actually use it with your clients. But then, you're right. As soon as I move into like 1.5 people working with me, it starts breaking and it starts getting out of control.
And the big thing from that is because it's free in architecture, you don't have the ability to lock down certain features, or you don't have the ability to force certain actions, like what I was saying with that type and subtype. I've made it required. Maybe that's important for billing, or maybe a report at the end of the year to figure out where you get the most value and where you get the least value.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much what it's come down to. That's right, because I can't lock down details, and at the same time, I can't lock down my database. So anyone that works with me could actually break the database if they on accident. And that's happened once. It was an easy fix, but anyone can get in there and they can change one setting and the whole thing goes. That's another danger with it, is at scaling as well. thing
You
I
think
had was
that's
a
bad
startup.
with 1.5 people? Try it with 10.
Yeah, exactly. So that's and like I trust my editor is my right hand man. Like she knows how to do things, and so she's been great. But as soon as I start bringing someone less trustworthy in, and by less trustworthy, I just mean less capable,
Yeah.
which is anyone when they first start, there is a lot of dangers that are going to come up. So that's why I've got to start getting this sorted now, and I probably want to try and get something going in a month's time. And I think what's also coming up for me then in my thought, and this is where my challenge is as well, how do these tools work on a, actually this might be a question for you, is like the reason why I went to Notion is on a micro level, it's really quick and efficient. A lot of these professional service automation tools, they work much better on a macro level, but the micro details sometimes can get time consuming. Do you see that, or do you think, because what you showed me, that actually might not be too difficult on a micro level?
Yes and no. And I think there is an element that you're just going to have to accept, in the sense that, and I've seen it time and time again from a business owner perspective. You see the business owner really good at what they do. They've gotten good at what they do. They're well practiced at it. They're very invested in it. They've spent hours and hours researching. But the next person's not going to do that. They're going to turn up to a job. They're going to go and do about 80% of the effort that you're ever going to put in. And you need to be aware that they're not going to move at the same pace. They need a structure and a recipe to follow. And even if it's a little bit time consuming and granular, I mean, you can try and work that down as much as possible with, testing, evolving. And like I identified some things I need to fix just in the conversation that we had just now. And that was just some status fields that I want to add to make it easier. But then, adding too many statuses, and then you have to explain to the person, well, if the situation's like this, then select this, then if it's not, then do that. You need to try and break those interpretational things down. And by having it as a drop down or a setting, you're kind of allowing that next person or group of people to be able to get in the similar, not the same, a similar mindset about that client, and an understanding of where they're at in the relationship, an understanding of what to do or not do as a result of all of those little bits and pieces. So yes, it is time consuming to go and select 5 fields that you would just in your head go, I know it, why would I bother? But you're planning for other people. Never plan for yourself, always plan for your other people.
Yeah, that's really clear. Yeah, plan for other people, because I know all the little micro things. I know that personal relationship with the client, but they don't. So next questions coming in my head are all very micro what if scenarios, particular to me. And I think the only way I can really answer them is to now just again take that information. I'm probably going to rewatch this and look at all the questions you asked and showed in your service management system. Yep. Is that what you call it? Or professional service automation tool?
Yeah, PSA, yeah. Professional
it's a PSA. Yeah, so I'm going to look at everything you've had, figure out all those things that I want to include, need to, want to use that tool, and then after that, I'm going to start comparing that against software. So could you give me a list of softwares I should look at to put in this comparison matrix, like just right off the top of your head what you can think of?
Yeah, so what you've got, but then it doesn't go into the granularity of tracking time in the same way and resourcing. We dabbled in a platform called Excello, which was good on the retainer, not very strong on the ticketing side, but for us more IT heavy, we needed that. Not so much. Then there's other major platforms do a lot of this as well. Actually, a smaller one you might want to look at is Avaza.
How do I spell that?
Avaza.
Yep.
And there's different industry specific sort of platforms, all the way up to enterprise grade ones. You could have a look at an IT industry specific one, which would be probably on the cheaper side. Might be something like Halo PSA. And again, you might take some of those IT functions out of it, but then you wouldn't use necessarily the remote monitoring management, the patching and all that sort of stuff, because you're in a creative industry.
Yeah.
All about
but the IT makes a little bit of sense because it's about using these digital people and keeping track of what they're doing in a sense. And a lot of the IT stuff have very similar functionalities.
Small, I might do something that takes me 5 minutes, but then I might do that for 20 clients in 1 hour. So I need to be able to bring it in, understand it, group it, categorize it, price it, do it, mark it as done, do the next thing. And at the end of the month, I need to be able to report, because someone will go, why did it take you 18 minutes to do this? It's not always as easy as it sounds, because, they think in their mind, oh, it takes 5 minutes to do this. But no, actually, it took about an hour because we had to communicate with you, communicate with a third party, wait for responses. And there was a person sitting there at the desk doing that. The actual, like I was saying with that click the mouse, go, hit enter, stop the timer. That's kind of what sometimes people think is involved, but there's a little bit more. Maybe we need to do some documentation research, or maybe after we did the task, because we were on a longer service agreement, we might write a whole bunch of notes and save it to that client file. So when we have that problem again, we can solve it in 5 seconds instead of 50 minutes or something like that. So we'll take that writing time and consume it, because it needs to be allocated somewhere.
You pretty much nailed what I was thinking, because that's what I'm getting to at the point now, is I don't know how long it takes for the people that I hire to do the jobs. And I like at least a monthly, but ultimately I'd like to be able to every day see if I'm hitting targets, if my business is both being productive and scalable. And that's the unique challenge I'm getting to with now. And it's a very painful thing I'm going through at the moment, because I really love the task management system I have now, because it's really quick and efficient and easy, but I need to find something that can give bigger, higher level overviews.
Yeah.
And it's got to be my next journey now, obviously, is going to be seeing is like, do I completely get rid of Notion and use one of these systems, or do I half and half it, use Notion for the micro level communications and then use a bigger task management system for the macro level?
So one of the next metrics or KPIs you're going to want to look into, since they're sort of salaried employees, you're going to need to look at utilization rate and billable hours. Yes, you've got it per project, but then outside of the project, you've got in between time, doing lessons, training, maybe there's meetings and things with clients that aren't billable. You've got a whole lot of in between time that's costing you money. So you want to give them some targets, and maybe even something that you can then have a conversation with, not only with your clients, but with your team. So you would say, all right, you have to track 8 hours a day, and you can, when you're not doing a project, you can put it in this category: admin, training, sales, or something else. And as they're putting it into those, you might say you have a billable hours target of 5 hours, 5 billable hours or 5 client-facing hours per day. And when you run your report, you can then see, okay, well, they were at 100% utilization. They spent their 5 hours every day, or maybe they were overutilized in the sense that maybe they did 6 or 7 billable hours, which is good, but maybe we need to allow a little bit of training time, rest, and admin. Maybe they're a little bit overloaded from client work. And then the other thing is, if they're under, you can say, look, I can see that you've been busy. What have you been busy on? Here, you've only billed 4 hours per day for the last week. And they say, well, I've got this internal project that's not billable and I've been busting my guts on that one. At least it's a conversation. Or maybe they're unproductive and that's a different conversation.
That's exactly right. That's why I know these things, and I want to be able to see these things quickly and efficiently. That's the dream, isn't it? But ultimately, and I want to have these productive conversations. Maybe it's not like the tough conversations are necessary, and that's something good to have as well. But ultimately, it's like I want to be able to see how the people I hire, how they're operating, and allow me to help support them the best way possible, because we don't know what we need support with until we had that data laid in front of us in reality. That's what I think.
Yeah, and when you're saying having that data laid out in front of us, if we are looking at every project, every time entry, that's not going to be sustainable as you scale up from 1 person to 10 people to 100. You're going to start managing by the numbers, and you need to look at those higher level figures and only drill down when there's what's called manage by exception. So you might say, this is my tolerance level. Anything inside or outside of that, sure, it's not right on the target that I want, but it's within the range. We had a slow week, that's fine. If it's a little bit more drastically different or consistently down, you might then go, okay, now we need to take some action. Go and have a talk with the team, go and do some training, maybe have some hard conversations if you have to, but without, what gets measured gets managed, and you can't possibly look at every data point, particularly as you start to scale up.
Yeah, that was really helpful, Avon. I think I know where I got to go next. This has been really enlightening and really showing me the possibility of how I can up-level my company next. So thank you so much. I'm sorted. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, but I guess a final thought is, a lot of businesses, they're looking for the easy. They're looking for the simple, quick fix, the Band-Aid, like particularly small operators. But I really think people need to spend time and get a little bit more elegant in the way that they do things, a little bit more educated around the processes like this, because media is gamified towards the quick win. So you've got the top 10 articles and blogs are always repeating the same surface level wishy-washy stuff. What I really think people need to get, go and buy a textbook, go and look through some academic journals, go and study someone who's done it really, really well and something very, very detailed, because just scratching the surface is not good enough. We need to really understand those nuanced parts and pieces to be able to really take it to the next level.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Where would I go for looking at academic research and textbooks? Where have you gone?
Well, studying courses and things, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but I tend to look for the ones that are longer, tend to look for the ones that are like a deep dive. I tend to look for ones that, like say for example with software demos, sometimes they've got that minute-long video on the website, but if you Google the company or if you search it in YouTube, quite often someone's done a webinar and they talk through the problems, they talk through the issues that they're trying to solve, and it gives you more contextual, how do you apply that information? When you're looking through, look at the source of the information that you're searching from. There's a lot of pop-up small operator businesses that really like talking about how to do things, but they don't have the backing or they haven't done it themselves, or try to weed them out quickly and look for someone who's actually achieved X or Y or that you want to do. And there's a lot of like show pony stuff on Facebook where they've got the Lamborghini, the Ferrari, they're driving around, but that looks good, but I don't really see the meat in the sandwich. So
there's got to be a name for them, but like they're just it's that there's that dodgy influencer. A fancy watch and a fancy car is not merit.
Yeah.
Owning a successful company is merit.
Yeah.
And you can't even tell what that is.
Well, I pump everything back into the business, so I pay myself probably very little. So you won't see me driving a Ferrari anytime soon, but you might see me list on the stock exchange in several years' time, so we'll see.
That sounds exciting.